Started.
Yep. Okay, so I'm Stuart Oppenheim from Child and Family Policy Institute of California, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you all today. A couple of reminders for those of you who've been listening in the background, you know that this is a webinar and not a Zoom session, so things are a little bit different as we learn to navigate the world of our new technology. So everyone is mute throughout the webinar. So know that we have a team that's continuously monitoring the chat, and questions posed there will be addressed either in the chat or through the presenter or in some sort of communication after the webinar. So we're going to put out a lot of information, and it may stimulate questions. We'll hope to get them all today, but we'll definitely answer them at one time or the other. And the presentation, as well as the renovation assessment tool, which Leslie Ann will be going over later in the webinar, will be sent to all registrants after the webinar. So I think that's it on the reminders. So it just, once again, welcome you to Relaunching Linkages. And this is one of two webinars, you probably know. This is focusing on existing counties that have been doing some form of linkages for a while. And then we'll do another one for new counties coming up. So I'm going to, and we do have an amazing number of people. I think Leslie Ann and Dana were singing out names of people they recognized as we went through it. And those of you who've been with us on this journey know that they prop me up in front of the crowd to do a little bit of welcoming before they get into the substance. So that's what I'm doing here today. And it's great to see everybody again. We remember seeing so many of you in person at our various conferences, including our last voyage on the Queen Mary in Long Beach at the end of our first tour. But anyway, great to see everybody again. And again, I was, part of my instructions are to tell you to introduce yourselves in the chat, but so many of you have been doing that, so that's great. So continue to let people know and call out to others. It would be so nice to be able to actually see one another in person, and we're hoping to do that soon. So before we get to today's goals, I'm going to do a little bit of a stroll down memory lane. Just for many of you have been on this journey with us, but a lot of you, even if you're in counties that have been doing linkages, you may not fully know the history of linkages. So bear with me for a couple of minutes, and I'm just going to give you a little bit of a tour. The linkages, the history of linkages goes back over 20 years, which is really amazing for sustaining an initiative over time. But linkages started soon after TANF was passed in 1997. And I know that's before some of you were born, but quite a while ago, 1997. One of our California foundations, the Stewart Foundation, which I always have to say is no relationship, so don't send me a grant proposal. But anyway, the Stewart Foundation learned about work that was going on in Colorado, where one county was using TANF funds to support families who were also in the child welfare program. And I thought, this is interesting. So they brought together a team from CDSS and a number of identified counties and set off on a site visit to Colorado to find out what they were doing. They brought back to California some good ideas, set up a work group to explore how to bring this concept to California. Between 1988 and 1999, the foundation worked with those counties and the state Department of Social Services folks to set a vision for what became the Linkages program. And that vision is grounded in the fact that poverty is a risk factor for child abuse and neglect, and that families at that time, families with incomes below $15,000 compared to families with incomes of $30,000 or more were over 22 times more likely to experience some form of maltreatment. So really understanding that intersection between poverty and child maltreatment. With foundation funding, a planning phase was launched in years 2003 to 2002, 2000 to 2002. And then in 2003, they started to pilot the Linkages program. And then that work was then transferred to our organization, the Child and Family Policy Institute of California, which was created in 2004. And since then has been the host for the statewide Linkages activities. We took it over. I can't remember how many counties there were, but we started a second implementation phase and expanded to well over 20 counties. So that was with the foundation funding. As that was running out, as foundations will do, they said, well, we've sustained this for long enough. We think the public, if it's valuable, the public sector should take it on. Fortunately, we learned that there was a federal grant opportunity. We sought that and received that. And from 2006 to 2011, Linkages in California was supported with a federal grant. When that ran out, recognizing the success of the program and how much your counties had invested in it, the Office of Child Abuse Prevention at CDSS continued to fund Linkages for another 3 years, from 2011 to 2014. And as that funding ran out, the CWDA Self-Sufficiency Committee took up funding for another 2 years, from 2014 to 2016. Unfortunately, we sort of ran out of all of those funding opportunities. And as I said earlier, we took a final tour on the Queen Mary, our last conference, and the funding for the state program and statewide program ended on June 30th of 2016. But since then, a number of counties, many of whom are on the call today, have been working on their own without statewide support to help maintain and stabilize their programs. So Linkages has, in one form or another, continued. And then over the course of the last 2+ years, CDSS has been working to revive Linkages, beginning work with the Capacity Building Center for States. December 2019, the state sought support from the center to help assess the current state of Linkages implementation and to potentially revamp and promote the deeper implementation of Linkages going forward. In March 2020, the state convened a kickoff meeting, which led to the formation of the Child Welfare CalWORKS Coordinating Work Group. That work group has been moving forward in creating what we're now calling Linkages 2.0. And thanks to CDSS, on January 1, 22, funding came to CFPIC to oversee the work to implement Linkages 2.0, building on the past work and kicking off with the work of counties on today's webinar. So our goals today are to understand what the relaunch of Linkages is all about, to value the assessment and planning as essential for renovating your Linkages program, helping you be prepared to use the renovation assessment tool and recognize how it guides planning for expansion or reinvigoration of your Linkages program, and so that you can learn how to access new supports available to Linkages coordinators and implementation teams. And with that, I am going to introduce our partners from the California Department of Social Services, who have been great champions of this work in its relaunch. So I'm going to introduce Lisa Witchey, the Chief of the Integrated Practice and Resource Development Bureau of the Children and Family Services Division at CDSS, and Damian Ladd, who's the Chief of the CalWORKS Engagement Bureau and the Family Engagement and Empowerment Division. So Lisa and Damian, take it away.
Thank you so much, Stuart. Well, I have to say, I am so excited to see, and I say see, but to see so many of you here today. I think it just really speaks to the importance of this program and that shared understanding that coordination between child welfare and CalWORKS or family sustainability just makes sense. It's really an opportunity that we saw at the state level for our two programs and systems to once again partner in support of children and families who are often interacting with both of these programs. And without that intentional coordination, we're faced with really trying to navigate two different programs with different requirements and having to try to make sense of what the coordination efforts are, what the case planning requirements are, who gets which benefit. And when we come together and we team, we are really doing what makes sense for families. So it's an opportunity for us to work smarter, not harder, and do so in a way that really positively impacts families. The other thing I just want to key in on here is the focus on prevention. I think from a state lens, this focus on prevention is really one of our biggest priorities on the child welfare side. That's something that we're uplifting through the Family First Prevention Services Act, so the federal legislation, and the opportunity to partner with CalWORKS, who offers like our biggest prevention programs and family stabilization programs is just really tremendous. So it feels like the timing is right. The energy and support is here and coalesced. And I just really want to thank you all so much for being here and staying the committed champions that you are. And I will turn it over to Damien to share a few more words, and then we'll kick it back to Dana.
Everybody, thank you, Lisa. Thank you, everybody. I think I'd like to start just by sort of letting everybody know it's a small thing, but I realize when people talk about their Wordle scores, it can be a little annoying. Somehow when I do it, it's breathtaking. So I wanted to start off by letting everybody know I'm undefeated. I remain undefeated at Wordle. So we can all feel good about that, I think. But I would like to sort of echo some of the things that Lisa said. It is definitely a departmental priority to focus on developing kind of a more robust and comprehensive continuum of services and continuum of care, which is at the heart of what Linkages is. I can talk a little bit from the CalWORKS side. We've been working to sort of move away from a compliance-oriented, work-first type of program to a program that's more case management focused and focused on building resiliency. You see that in things like our family stabilization program, in our CalOR effort, our home visiting program. And so again, our work here with Linkages is fully in alignment with those goals. And that's on top of the it just makes sense case management, case coordination between our two programs. So just again want to echo sort of the things that have been said. Very excited about this. I think we're going to be providing a lot of really helpful resources and tools, and very much thankful to everyone for being a part of this effort and look forward to our continued collaboration. So thank you. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Dana or to Stuart.
Yeah, I think I'll take it for a moment.
Okay.
And I want to say, Damien, I'll send you the link for Hurdle, which is the musical version of Wordle. And see if you can scale.
I don't know about that, Stuart. No.
Thanks to Lisa and Damien for being such great champions for this program. Again, many of us have been on this journey for over 20 years, and it's great to have you guys up in the engine of the train, moving us forward. So thanks so much to both of you. I'm just going to come on for a moment again to introduce our wonderful team. I've introduced myself, not so much part of the wonderful team, but here to help you guide you today are Dana Favela, who's our Linkages project director, and all of you know her forever if you've been on part of Linkages, and Leslie Ann Hay, who actually predates Dana in the Linkages work, and that 20-year history. I think she's right there at the beginning. So maybe at the foot of Mount Sinai.
You made me feel old there, Stuart.
No one's older than I am. Well, maybe somebody's older than I am. But and Roxanne Stevens, our Linkages project consultant, who did some of the great work carrying, as I talked about, the counties that carried on after the state funding. Roxanne was instrumental in helping the counties stay together to do the work together. So welcome to our team, and I'm going to turn it right over to Dana.
Yeah, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention Mia Stizzo, who you can see. She's our administrative assistant who does everything for us. So we appreciate Mia. So I'm sorry I didn't put your name up there, Mia, because folks who were part of the project remember Mia. All right, today's agenda, what are we hoping to, so you heard about the goals from Stuart, but to how we've structured the agenda, we're going to talk about our new vision for linkages, the 2.0, as Stuart talked about it. We're going to talk about the statewide support for linkages, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about linkages coordinator, why they're a bridge, why they're so important. Then we're going to do a little bit of a stretch break, just a 5 to 10 minute. We're just going to give you a chance to stretch. And then Leslie Ann is going to roll into talking about what it takes to renovate linkages and using the renovation assessment. And then we'll have some next steps. And we have a little time there to respond to some of the questions that might be in the text, in the chat. So, if while we're talking and something comes up, go ahead and put it in chat. And if Roxanne and Stuart are going to be monitoring it and Mia, and so if there's something they can answer, they'll answer. Otherwise, they're going to gather it, and sort of at the end, we'll have a chance to try to respond to some. And as we said earlier, we'll send out information to everyone that's registered, so sort of a respond to any questions that we couldn't while online. So a new vision. So where we've been. So Stuart talked about where we've been. We talked about what we were doing, for 7, 8, how many years that we were doing it, which was really more about coordination between mutual families. But we want to talk about where we're going. So our new vision for linkages, what is it exactly? So we talked about it. So linkage 1.0 is that's a historical one, and you can see it. And now let's see what we've done with 2.0. So 2.0, as you can see, is we expanded it. So our new and improved approach to linkages is really building on the work that we did. And I think Lisa and both Damien mentioned that both child welfare and CalWORKS really are looking at a very different model in their programs. One that's more about prevention, that's looking at family resiliency, that's looking at, how, what we can do around maltreatment. So it really did just make sense for linkages to also take that model. So instead of the 1.0, which was really the coordinated case planning, which we still want to support that, because that's a very important strategy when you have a family that is in CalWORKS and one that's in child welfare. That's important strategy. We don't want to minimize that, but what we want to do is look at how we build this continuum, the continuum of services between these very amazing 2 strong programs, CalWORKS and child welfare. So this is what we hope to do. So go ahead and just as the priority for the departments really is toward prevention and early intervention. If you're in child welfare, you've heard about the PPSSA, SFA, did I say it right? Stuart can correct me, because it's the prevention, the new federal prevention program that's out. So the counties at the child welfare side have been planning for that. So as I said, we're expanding the original linkages concept beyond the mutual cases, and we're aligning with prevention. And we are emphasizing prevention and early intervention as a key component for supporting families and keeping children safe. We know that, and we've always done that in child welfare, but we've always been dealing with tertiary, right? And when, all those evaluated out, I think, 60-70% of our cases are evaluated out. So those are all families that clearly somebody saw at risk, right? So how do we start moving our programs, both of them, in a way that we can support those families? So this new shift toward prevention and early intervention really offered an amazing opportunity for us to kind of take a step back, to think about linkages and what kind of program innovations that we could move towards to support this new thinking. So what is that framework? And actually, we're going to, if you haven't seen, I'm not sure if everyone understands that framework, the prevention framework, when we talk about that, but I think Damien used the word continuum. at one point. And so in some ways that prevention framework really is about a continuum. So primary, if you think about primary prevention, that's really programs that are really targeting an entire population. So you'll see, they provide support and education before a problem occurs. So you might see billboards in a community about, what families can do to make sure their children are being taken care of, or they're eating properly. For our program, it really was about providing, information resources for CalWORKS family, because our population really is the CalWORKS child welfare population we're talking about in Linkages. So those families that we know that are there are vulnerable families, because we know that poverty is a risk factor. So knowing that, and Damien said it very well, knowing that, what are the kind of services and things that we need to support them? So in a primary level, before family comes to us, the only thing we know is that they have, that they're in financial need. So that we know they're vulnerable. So what kind of supports and resources for families can we give them at that point? And that prevention and early intervention subcommittee of that work group that Damien and Lisa really chaired has really come up with some tools that we'll be sharing as we move this project forward. So secondary, what is that? They're programs targeted at families in need to alleviate identified problems and prevent an escalation. So the kind of programs that we have out now, as Damien mentioned those too, is sort of the family stabilization and home visiting programs. And in child welfare, we have differential response that folks are working with. And we also have those families that come to ER, emergency response, but they don't, they're a good share of them may be evaluated out because they don't rise to that level, but there's risk and concern. So what kind of services and supports can we start creating and thinking about this as a linkages opportunity? And of course, tertiary, it's really providing interventions for children that are already experiencing maltreatment. So this is where we were, that this third box, if you will, in our first iteration was family maintenance and CalWORKS services were coordinated case planning and case management, and FR, family reunification and CalWORKS services coordination. They're still very important. And as I said, we don't want to minimize that. And, and Leslie Ann's going to talk in a moment about, what we found out in that little simple survey that we asked as part of registration. So we're excited to have this opportunity to both stabilize in this tertiary and expand in the tertiary, and also to launch secondary and primary strategies. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my partner, Leslie Ann Hay, who I've been working with for many, many, many years. So here we are, Leslie Ann.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Dana. And we'll talk a little bit more about all of that as we move forward. But I know we've been doing a lot of recognizing who all is here, and some of our friends who've been with Linkages for a long time, and others of you that have been doing it on your own. And so we just thought we would take all that great information from the registration that you all submitted to join the webinar today, and recognize that we've got well over 250 participants that registered today, and that represents 38 different counties across California, which is pretty incredible, I think. And you can see them all listed here.
You're echoing, Leslie.
Hopefully your name is up here, and your team is represented here. The other thing to recognize is just the diversity, right? We've got folks from rural locations, from urban locations. We've also got almost every single team has brought more than one person to the table this afternoon. And so that's really a great representation of both the CalWORKS side of your operations and the child welfare side as well. So it sounds like you guys are already kind of beginning to form your implementation teams around Linkages, and you're your collaborative teams that will come together and really continue to evolve and enhance your linkages programs. I also want to, not only do we have our partners at the state level too, with Lisa and Damien and others from CDSS, but you've brought along some county partners yourselves as well. Some of your community-based organizations even that are maybe helping you with some of those prevention strategies that you're wanting to bring to your vulnerable families through the Linkages initiative. So we're really happy at CFPIC to continue to support all of you in that regard. And so from that standpoint, we wanted to do a little bit of polling here for a moment with you, and Mia's going to help us. And, there's two ways to look at our existing counties here. We know there's been lots of staff turnover, and you may be new to Linkages personally, but we wanted to ask this first question, if you know the answer, about how many years has your county been an active Linkages program? So this is your county as a whole. So for example, Contra Costa County, how many years has your county been involved with Linkages actively? And go ahead and for any county out there, just answer for your own county's perspective. Has your county been actively involved in Linkages less than a year, or 2 to 5 years, or 6 to 10 years, more than 10 years, or you might not even know. You may be new to Linkages yourself personally and you're not quite sure. So go ahead and respond to the poll there. And we'll go ahead, and when Mia sees those votes tallied and coming in, she will go ahead and present the results to us. But I have a feeling that counties are at different places, right? Some of you have had your Linkages program going for a very long time consistently, and some of you have been kind of in and out of having Linkages up and running. So do your best to just take a stab at how long you think that has been operating. And so if we have more than, yeah, there we go. Okay, great. Oh my goodness, look at that. We've got over 40% that have been at this for more than 10 years. Another 21%, 6 to 10 years. So, the majority of you out there are definitely, beyond the 5-year mark on being working on this service collaboration. So there's an awful lot of experience out there in our audience. And so let me pose the second question then, Mia, if you could. And this is for you to answer personally. For you as an individual staff person, how long? What's been your personal experience of how long you personally have been involved with Linkages? And so you can anywhere from I'm brand new to Linkages, right? Even though your county has some experience with it. I've been continuously involved with Linkages in my county, or I've been intermittently involved with Linkages in my county, or I've had experience with Linkages in a different county, right? So go ahead and give your best answer to that poll. And we'll see what our staff level responses are here, which will help us know. Linkages, I think, has been kind of an oral tradition in a lot of counties, and there's lots of handoff from the experience to the newer staff about the culture and enthusiasm that typically surrounds Linkages. So. So again, we've got about a third of you that have been continuously involved with Linkages in your county, about a quarter of you that are brand new to Linkages, and another about 40% or 45%, if we add them up, that either have been intermittently involved with Linkages in your county, or perhaps have experience from another county that you're bringing to the table right now. So again, I think we can build on all of that experience, but if you're new to linkages altogether, don't hesitate to pop a question into the chat if there's anything we can answer for you as we go forward. And I think the thing to remember for those of you that have been with linkages for quite some time, one of the things we discovered over the years with linkages is that, there's several kind of key ingredients to a good, robust linkages program, starting at the top, right? That it's really important to have a shared vision of what your linkages program is all about in your county. And by shared, I mean shared across both child welfare services and CalWORKS, that what you're trying to accomplish with linkages for the families that you're serving is really well understood, and a commitment exists around that shared vision. It's also really important to have some joint leadership at the top, as well as Lisa and Damien kind of demonstrated so wonderfully at the state level. That's really happening in this next chapter of linkages, and at the county level as well. That consistent, visible commitment from a joint set of leaders between CalWORKS and Child Welfare Services is really critical to cultivate and continue to maintain. And I know that's hard sometimes, right? Because there's turnover at the leadership level too. But again, all the more reason to sort of codify what you're doing with linkages locally and have that be institutionalized within your organizations. And then at the practice level, being able to accurately and systematically really identify who are the families that we're going to be serving with linkages is equally important to your linkages program, as well as really making a concerted effort at deliberate coordination across both programs, so that that's really the power a lot of times of linkages for families, is that they've got that team, that cross-system team working for their best interests. Even jointly training the workforce about linkages can have some really wonderful benefits of understanding each other's programs well enough to be a good collaborator, right? And to be able to really recognize where there's more opportunities to be able to share resources, to be able to support families in creative and innovative ways, and to really work toward those common goals. Leveraging resources is one of the really powerful benefits of linkages, right? I don't know how many times through the years we've heard people say, I didn't know CalWORKS could offer that to families. I didn't know they could help folks, repair their cars if they're broken, in order to have transportation again. Or on the other side, I didn't know that Child Welfare Services had, parent partners to help mentor families and begin to model effective ways of parenting. And so there's all kinds of not only services, but also kind of cultural resources that I think we can utilize on both sides of the house. And then again, this shared accountability, right, for both of our objectives. Even though I know CalWORKS is kind of moving away from that work first kind of focus that it had a few years ago, it's still a program that's helping families become more self-sufficient and building their economic resiliency as well as their family resiliency. And I think on the child welfare side, of course, it's always about family stability and child safety. And so I think there's even more alignment now between the two areas around those common goals than we've ever had before. And then finally, we can't say it enough, but communication is so critical between and across stakeholders to make sure that we're understanding our families from a holistic perspective, that we're able to support them when things change for families and new circumstances arise or new requirements are focused on the family in order for them to meet their goals. So that communication all along the way is just so critical for this partnership to be as effective as possible. So, you guys may be thinking about these things, at all different levels, right? Where do you want to start with your sort of rethinking your current linkages program? It could be in any one of these kinds of areas. And that's really where a self-assessment comes in. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Dana now, and I'll loop back around to the self-assessment idea a little bit later on in this afternoon.
Okay, thank you, Leslie Ann. So, we know that because this webinar is for existing Linkages County, we know that many of you have been your linkages program has been continued to exist over the last many years, even though you haven't had statewide support. But we're really excited because we do know from our experience that if you're going to have any kind of program or any kind of innovation, you really, and I'll say counties, the counties really need support for that work. And that was very apparent, what Leslie Ann will be talking about in a moment in terms of that question that you were asked about, where was your linkages program? So what our new supports coming forward will be, next slide. There. So one of the things that we think is very important, just like, when you all talk about, one of the things, if your deputies and your director doesn't support linkages, it's really hard for you at the operational level to really to make progress. And so for us at the statewide level, it's the same. I think the same, that's that parallel process. We need the partnership at the state level. So CDSS really is showing their ability to partner with us through having Damien and Lisa being lead on this from both those very important branches at the department. So with that, with their partnership, we're able to align linkages with the strategic direction both of those bureaus are embarking on. So for child welfare and CalWORKS now, we're able to work better together around the work that they're looking at as family stabilization and economic self-sufficiency, and we're able to partner better with our state department if we need. Maybe we need some legislative fixes. And so, our partners will be able to help guide us and help us to think that through in terms of what we might be able to get, if there is something that we need legislation on. And the last few years, we do have some legislation that will support the continuation of linkages through the recent one last year that continues the grant if a child is removed. The other part of the support that we're going to be putting in place is the oversight committee. And that oversight committee, both Damien and Lisa are going to be on that oversight committee. And we went to the CWDA, the County Welfare Directors Association's committees, both the Self-Sufficiency Committee and the Children's Committee, asking for volunteers. And I'm very pleased to tell you that had some really good volunteers come forward. So we're going to be holding our first oversight committee in April. And at that time, we're going to really work on a charter that will really outline the role and the purpose of that committee. It's not going to just be a committee that meets because we need to have a committee. It really, we want leadership at that top level. Both of those committees represent CWDA leadership, and we want them on board with what we're doing. And if we have, issues or concerns, we want CWDA to support us and work with us that. And both those committees have committed staff that will be county staff that would be part of that committee. Our toolkit. Now, those of you that were part of Linkages 1.0, we had a Linkages toolkit up. We still have it up, but it's not very operational for a variety of reasons. One, it's in the old framework. Our new Linkages toolkit will really will mirror our new framework around prevention and early intervention and the tertiary. So we're in the process of, at this point in time, updating that, and we were hoping that we would have it up this month, but delayed for a variety of reasons. And we're hoping at least by next month, we'll have that up and running that you'll be able to go to. And I think very important, and those of you that were part of 1.0, I think the learning collaboratives were so important. We had monthly webinars, we had peer interest groups. Those we're going to continue and expand upon, because the peer interests, I think we want to make sure we find counties that have the same kind of issues they're trying to work on, so that we can pull you together for you to learn from one another. As a former county person, I know that you learn best from one another. You steal shamelessly. You hear an idea and you think, oh, well, if they can do it, maybe we can do it in our county. So we want to give you those opportunities to learn from one another, to support one another. So we will be having, webinars, peer interest group. And again, as Stuart said, we can't wait to see your wonderful faces. We hope to reinstitute, we have plans and it's in our budget to have annual convenings. So we'll bring everybody together. Once everybody's counties will let them come together. We're hoping that is soon. So those are some of the things that we're thinking of. And of course, we'll reinstitute our newsletter so that we can share some of your best practices in our newsletter. And we'll be looking towards you when we do surveys to say, what else do you need? So we'll be leaning on you. And when I say you, I'm talking about coordinators. And that brings me to the next what I want to talk about. Linkages coordinators. One of the things when we did a survey, when we started doing this work about a year, maybe a little longer than that, and Roxanne did a lot of follow-up from that survey to touch base with you all. But one of the things the survey showed is that only 30% of you had actually identified linkages coordinators. So there was no there. In other words, Roxanne wasn't just calling whomever, because there was no one person that she'd call in 70% of the counties. So one of the things and why we think linkages coordinators are important, we want to talk a little bit about that. And there, it is an essential role. It is the key point of contact for both the local practice and for statewide support infrastructure. It's really hard. And, when the state has, any program, what do they ask you? The first thing they ask for what they call a POC, a point of contact, because you need to have that point of contact so that you're not trying to figure out in, Alameda County, who should I call? You know who to call when it's about linkages. It's the coordinator. So it provides statewide support, but it also very much provides your county staff, your county linkages program support as well. So what we are asking you, and experience tells that this is important, that from the large counties, the medium large county, we really would like you all to identify a coordinator from both your CalWORKS and your child welfare programs. So when I saw some of the folks, coming on, noticed, in LA, Gloria from the CalWORKS side and David from the child welfare side. And they were the coordinators that I always sort of leaned on in Los Angeles County. Now, they're a very large county, and there's some medium counties there too, who also had identified coordinators. Now, we understand and we recognize that very small counties may not have the bandwidth to have one from each program. Maybe you're too small, and we recognize that. So for smaller counties, we've also said that you might just have one person that is the go-to person, the coordinator that keeps things going. What's the role of the coordinator, you ask? Well, we've thought about it, and this is again something from our experience. So so it becomes the point of contact for the county. It also helps us gather and share support resources to staff. So one of the things Roxanne was doing, calling many of you, is we were trying to update the toolkit. And so we needed, we needed new protocols and stuff. So she was calling folks. And so we need that person to be responsible for sharing and giving us the documents so that we can then share and put on the toolkit so that everyone can see the great work that you're doing. So yeah, that's that third bullet, providing us material, offering county examples for your peers. And very importantly, and this is so important, that you really need to have an implementation team. You know that if you're going to do anything, any kind of new innovation or even expand, you really need a team, folks that are dedicated to do that. So your coordinator really is a guide for that, to make sure you're staying on target, sort of coordinating the linkages practices in your own county. Sometimes broker and communication between CalWORKS and child welfare. And we know that sometimes that can be a little rough. And so your coordinator can hopefully broker that. Work with staff to identify and guide training needs. So we know one of the things is that it's a different way of doing business as we move into this prevention field. And it really is important to help, to think about, what kind of training needs do your staff in CalWORKS and child welfare need in order to kind of get on that same page around. This is a continuum from CalWORKS to child welfare. It is not a silo of child welfare and CalWORKS. It's a continuum. And very important is champion for linkages. So just like at the state level, we have Damien and Lisa that are our champions. You become the champions. The coordinators are the champion for linkages because there's so many things that are happening at the local level. We know that linkages can get lost. It has in many counties, and it's part of the reason it gets stalled because there aren't enough champions in the counties. But it's really important for those linkage coordinators to take that role serious. And so, what's in it for you, linkages coordinators? So, one of the things we've heard, and this is, we've heard through the years that we've done this work at the, helping you all and supporting you all, is that there's a lot of positive visibility of being a linkages coordinator. It really has helped advance a lot of careers. I mean, that was really kind of nice. We hated to see them leave, but we knew that they were going on to some other things. So there's, there's visibility for you. And when you do it, when you love something, like people that, become coordinators, you love this work, it shows, and the agency sees that. It also is understanding the cross-program, the cross-system collaboration. For one thing, when you're in child welfare, I knew child welfare, I didn't know CalWORKS. When I became the linkages, statewide coordinator, I learned CalWORKS, and I really learned what an amazing program the CalWORKS program is in terms of for families. So it really becomes this, you become the holder of these two important systems, and it is a rewarding role. And one of the things that we looked at in our evaluation is that working in linkages is a rewarding role, not only for our coordinators, but for the staff that are doing linkages. They really feel like they're doing something for families. And it's not, as Damien put so nicely, it's not just compliance, it's really being able to support and help families. So that's what's in it for you if you become the designated coordinator, and I'm hoping you will. So right now we're gonna take 5 minutes? So we want you back at 4, is that right? 7 minutes. And for large counties, we really do strongly suggest that you have one from each one of those programs, because I know how the counties are organized, having been in 3 counties myself, that they are very, they have their own structure, each one of those with the director over each. And so you really need those programs coming together. And the only way you can do that is if you have really champions on both of those programs.
That's right.
As we said earlier, for very small counties, that's maybe not as much a problem as it is in larger, medium and large counties. But we do know that from our own experience, that it can be problematic unless there's leadership support on both sides.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Having that direct line to your own leadership chain of command, if you will. Yeah, that's great. Well, I hope everybody got a little bit of a stretch. I want to go ahead and continue on. Thank you, Dana, for that great overview of some of the supports and key roles and linkages. I'm going to switch gears here now a little bit and talk more about, what does it really take to renovate your linkages program, right? For those of you that have been doing this for quite some time or have done it for some time and are wanting to really step back and rethink your linkages program kind of under this 2.0 umbrella and kind of infusing prevention into that process. And again, we can kind of go back to, we wanted to take a look at some of the responses that you all provided to in your registration. We asked that question in your registration of sort of if you could say in a short phrase, where is your linkages program right now in your county? Sort of what stage of implementation are you in, or what stage of robustness are you in? And we had 258 respondents to this question across all 38 counties. So and so these were team responses, right? That multiple individuals from a team who registered for the webinar today from a single county may have provided very different perspectives about where they thought their particular county's linkages program is. But you can see that it's really quite a broad reality of everything from, you've got a stable program going, but it's in pockets, right? It's not countywide. We had 18 teams indicate that to some degree or another. Another one that was very frequent was it's implemented, it's on the ground, but it's not really consistent, throughout. And it maybe isn't to fidelity to some of your protocols or the direction that you want to be going in the future. Another couple of responses that were quite common was, it's in place, it's operating well, but we're having challenges with our partnership, right? We're needing to sort of reestablish our agreements and our way of working together, and that needs to be revisited. Or that it was thriving at one point, but it has lost momentum for whatever reason, from staff turnover, leadership turnover, all kinds of institutional memory can sometimes leave the program, and that can stall you out. And then there's quite a few of you here today who really have no formal linkages practice in place at all. And that may be that it was in place in the past and it's sort of extinguished itself. Or perhaps you've been doing it on your own and you weren't part of the process here statewide earlier in the earlier phases. And so, there's really a wide array, right? And it really implies, the other interesting thing is that within any given team, for a lot of counties, y'all didn't have the same view of your linkages program. You had very different perspectives, everything from we have no formal linkages practice to, it's stable but not countywide in the same team. So it clearly, that sort of indicates that, it's a great time to come together and reflect on your own linkages program and really be able to think about, where do we want to begin with understanding where our program is right now and what direction we might want to take it going forward, right? Where do we want to go from here? Do we want to upgrade, our current linkages program and kind of infuse this prevention focus into what we're already doing? Or do we want to expand to serve more families? Or maybe we just want to breathe new life, right, into a linkages effort that's kind of stalled out in our location. So that's really where, this idea of assessment and planning comes in. And so I want to just give you a little bit of an overview of some of the tools that we've created over the years and have recently revamped with our new prevention focus and the sort of 2.0 elements that Dana was talking about earlier. But it really all starts with self-assessment, right? And it's a way for you all to really examine your current reality in kind of a systematic way within your teams and be able to sit down together, reach some consensus and interpret those results. And so we've got some tools that we have crafted for all of you to be able to utilize in that regard. We're going to dive into one of those in just a moment. But the self-assessment does not sort of stand alone. It's really part one of a part two kind of process that you want to walk your implementation teams or planning teams through. And given what you learn from your self-assessment collectively, you're going to want to be able to do some planning around that, right? Be able to identify some critical priorities that you want to address, right? After you've been able to see where are our strengths, Where are our gaps? You know, what direction do we want to move this in the future? What does success really look like for our linkages program if we were to project ourselves into the future? And how do we get there then, right? What are the steps that we want to take? And how can we delegate that work amongst our community of team members and others within our programs to really be able to move linkages forward? And that's where you can document all of that into a work plan template as well, that'll really help you guide and pace the work over time. Today, we're really going to focus on this renovation assessment tool, right? And the reason we have two tools here is this one is designed for counties who've already been doing linkages to some degree, like most of you have been. The readiness assessment is a complementary alternate tool for new counties to linkages, counties that really, you know, either want to start completely over or are really starting from scratch and have never done linkages before. And so I think most of you fall in this category today of really wanting to step back and examine what your linkages program is doing now and how do we move it forward into the future. Work planning would be the next step once you have your assessment completed. And we're actually going to plan to have another webinar next month on April 19th from 10 a.m. to noon in this similar kind of format where we can have folks come together like yourselves who've completed their self-assessment process, and we'll walk through where do we go with planning based on what you found, right? So we'll take a deep dive into the work planning template and how all that works. But for today, we're really going to focus on the renovation assessment itself, okay? And so how we've organized that assessment tool, it's really kind of a questionnaire with a series of rating scales on it. And it covers various topics that we've found to be reflective of some of those key ingredients that we reviewed a little bit earlier this afternoon. And they kind of fall into three categories of information. You know, one is around just stepping back and thinking about the direction that you want your linkages program to take, you know, whether that's expansion or renewal or both. And so it asks about, you know, strategic direction, the kind of target populations that you want to focus on, kind of the infrastructure of coordination, I like to call, like, do you have the bits and pieces together to really facilitate good, strong coordination and collaboration? And then questions around communication as well. There's another segment of the assessment tool that really dives a little deeper into practice development, right? Do you sort of have the dimensions of your linkages protocols in place? Do you like the way they're working? Are those the places where you want to do some adjusting and changing? So it talks about client identification, coordinated case planning for those that are working in more the tertiary level of things, and even the secondary level as well to some degree. Information sharing, confidentiality, as we all know, whenever we're teaming, those are always areas to focus on how we're doing on. And then there's sort of some administrative type questions in the assessment as well that think about how well are we sort of managing the development of our linkages program, as well as is our workforce getting trained effectively? Do we have the resources in place that we need to keep linkages going in the way that we want to? And what are we doing about outcome evaluation and being able to know whether our linkages efforts are having the impact that we would like it to have with our families and even with our staff who are involved? So from that, I wanted to go ahead and switch out here for a moment. I'm going to stop sharing for just a minute, and I'm going to pull up a different document here so that, okay, hold on just one moment here. let me just pull up. What I want to do is I want to be able to pull up the I want to be able to, let me just move all these out of the way here. Okay. Do you want to pause for just a moment, Mia, on the recording? So here we are, you guys, this is actually a Word document. Okay, this is the Linkages renovation assessment tool itself. And this will be also circulated to all of you following the webinar. And so it's really kind of a simple tool in terms of managing it. And it allows you to just, you know, again, identify your county here and gives you some brief instructions as well. And it goes through a series of questions in each of those three sort of, you know, domains that I talked about earlier, right? And so it'll ask questions in sort of declarative statements, and your role here to facilitate, you know, responses to this is really to pull your team together and ask yourselves collectively these questions, right? A lot of counties, you know, distribute this tool in advance to those members of their team that they want to weigh in on, and they all individually respond, and then they come together with their scores, and they come to consensus to reach a common score. Because what you're looking for here is from strongly disagree to strongly agree with these various statements, right? So for example, this first question, you know, is about strategic direction, and it asks, our written Linkages vision, mission, and guiding principles supports sustainable service coordination and collaboration between CalWORKS and Child Welfare Services. Is that happening in your county? To what degree? Is that something you need to step back and rethink or do differently? And so you're able to identify where you land on that continuum as a team and move through all of these questions in that same vein. This one talks about leadership and the commitment of leadership to your strategic direction. Again, the next question talks about the visibility of linkages as an organizational priority in your county, whether or not you sort of have common shared goals at the highest level between CalWORKS and Child Welfare Services. And that you really have an environment that supports teamwork across systems, right? And that you're really not working in silos, or you don't have a culture that reinforces working in silos, right? And that, you know, whether or not you've reached a decision in your county about how linkages will grow, right? What are the directions do you want to expand it to new locations? Do you want to create new target populations that you might want to explore? But have you agreed on what that decision is? And you may not have, and that may be an area then for growth and attention in your planning. Same with the question about identifying new target or underserved target populations that you may want to pursue. And again, questions about your data systems and whether they're supporting the kinds of activities that you're involved with in your linkages protocols, from client identification to communication and collaboration to outcome tracking. And do you have that infrastructure to really support that? As well as, what kind of awareness level do you have amongst your stakeholders, or those who have a stake in linkages in your location, in terms of how it works and who benefits and what their role might be in participating in that? And so it continues to go on. There's questions about practice development in the next section as well. This is also an editable Word template here. So if you want to add a question, that's perfectly fine. If you want to write some commentary underneath any of these questions to be more descriptive about it, that can help you as well. And again, these practice development questions are really about the nature where are you with really documenting protocols, if you will, policies and procedures? I know Roxanne talked with many of you over the last several months about your protocols and policies, and I think the overwhelming response from many of you was we're working on revamping them, right? And so this is another way to kind of check in on that and see what else needs to be explored in order to stabilize some of those practice tools that you want to have available for your staff. And then finally, these are kind of the support environment around linkages and taking a look at that. Do you have linkages coordinators in place, right? Have they been named and are they carrying out their role? Or do you need to name new ones or onboard some new folks who will be playing that role? So, and do you have some sort of a steering committee or oversight committee to be able to, track your implementation activities and making sure that you're following through with the kinds of changes that you want to make to linkages? Do you maintain a work plan to be able to guide the kinds of, policy and operational and administrative enhancements that you want to make to linkages? And again, is linkages related data in order for you to track outcomes or get client satisfaction or any of that being routinely collected and analyzed so that you can make those kinds of program improvements? Are resources in place so that you can take advantage of funding sources to support linkages? And has linkages been integrated into your staff training and development plan, right? Is that something that new staff are made aware of what linkages is all about and what their role is in it? And is there maybe advanced curriculum that you're looking at around collaboration or partnership development or something like that you're looking to do? And then finally, is linkages in your location tied in with your system improvement plan on the CalWORKS side or your CalWORKS county plan on the CalWORKS side, or even maybe in your FFPSA prevention plan, there could be a home for linkages there too. So getting at that idea of, how is linkages connected to the broader goals of your organizations? And so with that sort of, that stimulates a lot of discussion. I'll tell you right now, right? When you start to ask yourselves those kinds of questions and really talk across your team members of your implementation team about how folks view that, it really creates some great conversation about not only where you are now, but where you might want to go. So these are all, you can tell these are numbered, so you can put a little X, right, and wherever your consensus lands you on the answers to these questions. And then there's a real sort of simple way to kind of consolidate, other than just reading through it and taking a look at it. You can also begin to interpret your results by simply adding up the scores, right, of all of your answers across the entire document, right? And you have this little guide at the bottom, so you can enter your total score to the 23 questions in the tool, and you can place it in this box. Maybe you got 68 or something, and when you go down here to interpreting results, it just kind of helps guide you. If you're maybe you're getting more ones and twos, right, in your answers and on the tool, the questions are phrased in such a way that kind of indicates that, there's some areas where you want to focus some targeted time and energy and planning to really breathe new life into linkages, right? Because that means some of those basic key ingredients maybe aren't quite in place the way you need them to be. So when you go back and take a look at where those lower scores are, if you're in the 23 to 43 kind of range in terms of your total, that's really gives you a clue about some of the areas that you're going to want to target in your planning. If you're like, I just guessed here, if you land at 68 right in the middle here, 44 to 90, that means you've both got some high scores and some low scores, right? So you've got some things that are really solidly in place that you can build on and leverage. And then there's other areas that you may be that need some attention. And so when you take a close look at what those are, for example, maybe your leadership on both sides is fully on board, but there's some other practice areas that, need some attention, but you can leverage and use that leadership, to really, build on that strong alliance to make some of those improvements. So, and of course, if you're at the over 90 range, you're pretty poised to sustain your linkages program. And what you're probably just trying to do is, keep the momentum going and continue to see how you want to enhance any of the protocols that you have in place now. So, with that, I think this will give you a good idea of, what the tool itself looks like, what the nature of the questions are. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing again. I don't know if there are any questions before I go off of this tool, Roxanne, in the chat or anything.
Yeah, so one question that I thought that's specific to this tool is about considering Family First Prevention Services program when you are doing this reassessment in your county.
Yeah.
So the question was just should we consider this as we're doing this reassessment? My answer was yes. Yes, it's good to look at all other initiatives that could benefit just the overall linkages partnership, funding sources, other resources, and that sort of thing. So I don't know if there's anything else that you'd like to say.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, Roxanne. And I also think it's another one of those sort of high level directions that, certainly child welfare and CalWORKS, I think are moving in often together. And so again, if you've named linkages, for example, in your comprehensive prevention plan, that's a great thing to note here, right? It's sort of similar to those questions at the very bottom where we said, is it aligned with your SIP or with your CalWORKS county plan? It's sort of at that similar level too. So again, add a question, a consideration like that. It makes a lot of sense for sure.
Yeah, and I was just going to add that that's really important to leverage whatever, we've always said this, it's important to leverage and fit linkages into the priorities of your agency. So FFPSA for the child welfare side, we know it's a priority. So, think about it. How does it fit in? I think it fits in perfectly because the comprehensive plan, the OCAP will be asking the child welfare directors to consider really does look at it from a whole continuum. So linkages is a perfect example because it really is part of primary and early intervention plan. And the supports and resources that the CalWORKS program now offers families is just amazing. And so, you really want to think about how you leverage that thinking into the planning efforts for that work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Any other questions or?
So one just came up around collaboration. And so the question was, in this tool, do you mean between the teams of child welfare and CalWORKS together? And so so of course, yes, it's those teams and then other partners that would support the team as well. So
in terms of, you mean who you should bring to the table
when you're thinking about the collaboration and how you will be working collaboratively, there's really thinking about like what partners would help to support the entire linkages program.
Yes.
And definitely those two, child welfare and CalWORKS, and there may be others.
So can you guys see my screen? Okay. Yeah, we're on the self-assessment who participates slide now. Okay, great. So that's a perfect segue to what we were going to sort of talk through here a little bit in terms of, so who do you bring together, right? And definitely you want to bring together players knowledgeable about linkages in your county, but also those who are supporting linkages in some ways, right? Like I noticed in terms of the registrants for the webinar today, there's a few counties out there who brought some community-based partners, for example, who clearly have a role to play. Maybe it's a family preservation linkages protocol that you have in your county or something like that, and you're counting on community-based organizations as partners with that, that would be a great partner to bring to the table too, and to reflect on how are we doing, where are we right now with our linkages program, and where might we want to head in the future. I can think of we definitely would want to have some voices. Definitely your linkages coordinators is helping guide this process, right? Of reflecting on your practice together and reflecting on your linkages program together. But staff who served linkages families in your location would also be great members to include in that, in this exercise, right? As well as maybe supervisors or managers with a focus on prevention, for example, if that's something you want to bring in to this work going forward. And then other staff, maybe data analysts or training staff who also have a perspective on what they've seen in terms of your linkages knowledge base, or the data that you are able to capture around linkages, or any of that that helps inform that. And of course, your leadership too, obviously, right? If you've got a champion at the top, or you want to build a champion at the top, that would be a great individual to bring into this process as well. The power of this is in bringing that sort of 360 view, if you will, of how linkages is going in your location, and really being able to have them help you identify what are our strengths and what are our growing edges as well, right? And how can we see that from multiple points of view.
And I would also add, I saw where Lisa Matheson added that they had at their meetings their fiscal person. I was actually going to say that you might bring some fiscal or if you had evaluation people that do that, bring them in early. And I would also say another partner that would be very important is many of you have parent partner programs. So bring your parents in, because they can be real advocates for linkages, because they know what you're trying to do, which is really trying to support families earlier. And if they become a child welfare case, you're really trying to coordinate all the services that you can to make sure that the children go home as quickly as they can.
That's great. Thank you, Dana. Yep. All right. Good.
And before we go ahead. You're finishing that.
No, I was going to start something else here in a minute. Go ahead, Dana.
Yeah, I was going to say, I wanted to lift up a couple things from the, the chat that I think, because I really do think working in this program, either as a line staff or as the coordinator, is really so important. And so it's very interesting as I read some of the folks that, I know have been around for a while, who, put some comments in there, like Gloria from LA talked about that she really enjoyed being a line supervisor and then becoming the department coordinator, and she found it very rewarding to work with her child welfare coordinator, and partnering and championing linkages with both CalWORKS and the Welfare to Work staff. And Julian Seidenberg from Sonoma talked about how satisfying it is to see families succeed in both programs. And John, I think it's Fresno is, seeing families thrive when linkages touch them. When in Fresno, our housing complex for family, they use the housing to help reunify families. And Ladina, I think it's Tehama, as a coordinator, I enjoyed meeting others from different counties. That's the other thing. You get to meet folks across the state so that you're not as isolated. So you get new ideas and new contacts. And we have somebody else saying that it's rewarding to see many of our families moving forward. And I think that's absolutely true. When you see how the families take to you all working together to support them, it's really exciting.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I wanted to just note too, when you're, once you've completed, your consensus around, where we would rate ourselves in all of those 23 questions, this is just sort of the beginning of the scoring piece that we just talked about is just kind of the beginning of taking stock of what does that tell us about where we are and where do we want to go from there. because it helps you look back and reflect on the numbers and kind of ask yourselves, you know, what implications does that have for what we want to hang on to and keep moving ahead with as is, and what do we want to begin to adapt or change or innovate or renovate, if you will, or about our linkages program. And that's really where you want to ask yourself then, you know, these sort of follow-on questions, right? Is, you know, what do we as a team make of the ratings that we recorded here? What is this basically telling us about, you know, our linkages program as it stands right now, and which aspects of it are strong and something we want to continue with, and which need some attention, right? And it's also really, you know, helpful to sit back and really think about what are the factors that you think might be contributing to, you know, these gaps that you may be perceiving between where you are now and where you might want to be in the future or next, right? You know, even looking at something like, you know, infusing a prevention focus, for example, into your linkages program, you know, what will it take for us to be able to do that? Who are our players within our county environments to be able to really lift up what that means and what the opportunities are to be able to connect what we know about linkages right now and what we've been doing to maybe being able to push that upstream a little bit farther, or identify families earlier or something like that, right? And then that'll start to stimulate discussion about what are the specific ways you want to change or expand linkages based on your assessment findings, right? And you can start to jot those down and begin to capture those. And that's really where holding on to that kind of interpretation of your results really sets you up well then to begin some goal setting and positioning yourself for the kind of work planning activity that we want to dive deeper in with you later on at our next webinar next month. So your task for now, you know, taking this a step at a time here of where do we begin, right? The first thing out of the gate, if you haven't done so already, is really identify those linkages coordinators, right? And you'll have this slide deck following the webinar here, so you can refer to that slide that talked about the role of that position, so you can communicate with your candidate staff people that you think might be great folks to fill that position, and be able to talk to them more about that and think through how to be able to identify those individuals. And then you'll want to, if you haven't already, I'm kind of thinking some of you have, because we have such great numbers and great sized teams from the different counties present here today, but you want to kind of formally gather your linkages implementation team together, you know, and let them know that, you know, we're going to begin now to really think through where do we want to go from here with our linkages program. And there's, you know, new life being breathed into linkages at the statewide level, and we want to be able to be part of that locally here too. And so what we're hoping is that in the next, what is that, about 5 or 6 weeks or so, that you'll be able to sit down with that implementation, with that assessment renovation tool, and sit down and have a dialogue with your implementation team, and just get to that point where you've responded to the questions, right, together, and you have a sense of how you guys would rate yourself and have that discussion. And if you can come then to the linkages work planning webinar on the 19th and participate in that with your assessment tool completed, you'll be in a great position then to really be able to move forward with planning around that analysis, and really being able to then rally your team around, you know, what priorities do we want to set for ourselves? What's our vision for linkages going forward? And who else do we need to have at the table here to really prepare some action plans, if you will, for how we're going to get from where we are now to where we want to be in maybe a year from now or 2 years from now. And so again, we will focus on the work plan template and the process to develop your work plan at that webinar on April 19th from 10 to 12. And if you can gather your teams in the meantime and get a sense of kind of your current reality and begin to interpret those results, I think you'll get a lot out of that experience, and bring your teams to this next webinar. So with that, I want to go ahead and turn it back over to Dana and Roxanne and Stuart, and see if we've got other questions or anything in the chat that anybody wants to lift up and we can answer at this point.
So Dana, do you want to answer the question from Lolita Castillo about getting the names of the attendees?
Yes. So one of the things, once you've identified who your coordinators are, and Lolita, I know that I remember you from our earlier days, so I'm sure you're still the coordinator there in Santa Clara County. We'll give you the names of all the people that registered from your county, so that you'll know who was registered. So you'll be able to see that. So we can do that for all the coordinators. So if you have any other questions, make sure you, put it in the, and so you've actually, Lolita, somebody responded in the chat, so somebody else from Santa Clara County that's on. So if you have any questions about any of the presentation, you can put it in the chat now. Anything that you want clarification on in terms of, what we're trying to accomplish.
Yes.
I don't see any leftover questions in the chat.
So there's a question coming through from the Q&A. The Q&A function, are there specific state requirements regarding linkages? So yeah, I think we can do a whole webinar on that one, but I wonder if Leslie Ann or Dana wants to take a stab at that question.
Well, linkages is really a best practice. There isn't any, there is no requirements or no mandates. And it's one of the things that have been both the beauty of it as well as the challenge of it. Because the beauty of it is that you get to do some good practice. You get to, you get to create a linkages program that fits your county where you're at. So there's, as Leslie Ann used to always say, we've got many flavors of linkages, because depending upon where you at, some families work with family maintenance families, some with family reunification families. So now we've got even more flavors, because we've got a whole prevention kind of strategy. However, that's the good news. But the bad news around that, because it's not a mandate, it just means that counties often get focused on things that they have to do, the compliance kinds of things. And so this can get lost. So linkages did not get new funding. We got funding, we being CFPIC, to help support you all in the work. I know that CWDA was considering a legislative proposal. It did not, I don't know if it went through the board of directors. So it did not get, as far as I understand, it didn't get through the board of directors as a legislative priority. It doesn't mean that we can't continue to work, and that might be one of the legislative priorities that this group wants to work on, or wants to sort of talk to their directors about. But there was a new law that was passed that really does support the coordination of families in family reunification. Those of you that have been around for a long time know that AB 429 provided the ability for counties to continue the supportive services that went to families if a child was removed. That was really one of the things that the former iteration of linkages we worked on with CWDA to get that passed. This last one, which was in the budget trailer bill, which becomes effective July 1st, is that the funding now can stay in to the family, so that the mother might not lose
the cash assistance. Yeah.
Right, the cash assistance can stay. So The state hasn't put out their guidance on that, and so we'll be part of, we being the Linkages project will be part of the review of whatever guidance that the state is going to put on that, because it was very open. It didn't have a lot of criteria around it. AB 429, which was its own bill, had a lot of detail. But because it was in the budget trailer bill, it doesn't have a lot of detail. So that has to be worked out. But that really does support reunification and the collaboration with CalWORKS.
And the other thing I was just going to add to that, Dana, is just, with the direction that both the programs have been taking in the last few years, with so much more focus on teamwork and, supporting families through case management and family stabilization efforts and all of that, it makes some really good logical sense, right? To make sure that with all of these teaming environments now that we have established as requirements, that we're getting the right partners to the table that can really help with poverty poverty issues and family stability issues in a way that leverages the resources that are out there and available for families, right? And we don't place that burden on families to try and navigate, negotiate that for themselves, but that we're really wrapping that around the families in how we approach the work. And so I just think there's more opportunities than ever. And now with FFPSA and this focus on prevention, I mean, CalWORKS is just the perfect partner, right, to be at the table for those kinds of conversations and to really say, are we accessing families as early as we possibly can to help them get the benefits and everything they're eligible for as early as possible, so that we aren't seeing these kinds of deeper penetrations into the system later on down the road in their lives. And so like we always used to say, it just makes sense.
Yeah.
Right?
And I would be remiss if I didn't mention, and I know that the CalWORKS side of the house some counties, they are actually implementing the core practice model in the CalWORKS side of the house as well. But I do know in the child welfare side, and I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the core practice model, because it is one of the other best practices. Actually, we consider it basic practice is the core practice model and the behaviors. Those behaviors really are about teaming, engaging, advocating for your families, teaming with your partners. And so Linkages really does fit into, if your county is implementing the core practice model, it really does fit into those behaviors, the kind of teaming behaviors you should be doing with your CalWORKS partners and your families.
So Dana, another question came through the Q&A function. Is the Linkages meant to help more families other than the AB 429 families? So my response was just really brief about like focusing on the prevention side of it. So maybe you can speak a little bit to that, either Dana or Leslie.
Yeah, I would just, first of all, a lot of the counties work with family maintenance and child and CalWORKS. And in fact, more counties work with families that were in family maintenance, either voluntary or court ordered in CalWORKS, than they did family reunification. It was one of the areas, and it was in a recent survey we did, I guess, last year, it was one of the areas a lot of folks didn't even know about AB 429. So that is an area that we really focused on at that point. But as we said, we really are expanding it to an early intervention model. And so we'll be coming up with guidance and thinking as we grow this program, that we'll actually have some guidance in there around what, early intervention and linkages looks like, primary, with your ER staff, as well as with your, maybe your contract staff that are doing differential response. So as well as in CalWORKS, they're doing family stabilization and intensive case management, as well as home visiting. So there's a lot of programs that weren't around when we first started our first iteration to really look at how how social services, whether it's CalWORKS or child welfare, how these two big programs support families in what we call this continuum of services. CalWORKS is seeing families before before child welfare sees them, but they shouldn't be so isolated. We should see ourselves as a continuum, and that's what we're hoping to create as we move linkages into the next iteration. Does that answer your question? Whoever questioned that or asked that question?
Yeah, that was Jean, right? I think that's
It was,
great.
I didn't know if you wanted to add anything, Leslie Ann.
Yeah, no, I again, same thing, voluntary FM, and CalWORKS. So those have been very common, collaborations that occur, but also, counties have done interesting things as well. And I think those will become even more possible going forward, where, you're maybe looking very early on at families who become known to child welfare services, for example, and they are not involved in CalWORKS, but should be and could be. And so to be able to provide some expedited, eligibility services to those families to make sure they're getting connected, because many of those families end up closing out or evaluating out of child welfare services anyway. And so it's a nice way to make that early connection to make sure that they're getting everything that they need. And the same thing we've seen happen as well on the CalWORKS side, where families who come in for services on the CalWORKS side, but are showing some signs of stability issues or factors where they are showing vulnerability, maybe connecting them to some of those family support resources that are out in the community that child welfare has good relationships with and connections to. But we don't need to refer them to child welfare to get those services. We have understanding with the community that we're going to, refer those families to those organizations before it gets to that point, so that we can really get that prevention focus in place to help support their needs from an early process. But it's all about that collaborative relationship that you want to establish in your county environments to really be able to take advantage of everything that's available for families who come to your door. So with that, let's see, any more?
Without other questions, unless somebody
That
has.
was just a thank you.
Not
All
seeing
right.
that.
Good. All right.
Do we have one other slide, or did we finish our slide?
Yeah, no, we just wanted to kind of recap, Dana, our next steps.
Yeah, and if you think of something that you later on, there's my email up there, dana.fabella@cfpic.org. Please send me an email. I'll be, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. If I don't know the answer, I'll find out how I can get the answer to you. But your next steps, really, I think Leslie Ann said, we'd really like you to identify linkages coordinator from both your child welfare and CalWORKS side of the house, so to speak. And if you're a small county and that's not possible, send me an email, let me know that. And and you might just have one coordinator. We want you to either reestablish, or if you don't have one, really establish your team that's going to really look at the implementation of the, it's going to help move this forward in your county. You've got to have a team of folks that are focused on the implementation of linkages to really make it work. We want you to complete the renovation assessment tool. It's easy to do. We made it simple. We just built on the one that we had last year, or with the last iteration. You might do it all as Leslie Ann suggested. You might do it individually, come together, and then have a meeting to kind of see if you can reach consensus, so that you can say, yeah, we all need to work on these 3 areas. These are the areas we want to work. So have that assessment tool completed. And we would really like you to register as a team, because we had a lot of folks registering and you didn't know who was here. A lot of folks don't know who is here from their county. So we'd really like your coordinator to take responsibility to who's going to be, and there's no limit. I mean, we'll do it as, we'll figure out how either we do webinars or we do breakout rooms if you need some particular help on your work plan. But we'd like you to register as a team. So Mia's going to be developing a registration flyer that asks you to do that as a team. And you'll get that sometime next week. I think, Mia, you said you get it out next week after we get both today's webinar and Friday. We have one on Friday as well, finished. And we didn't want to confuse people with another flyer, registration flyer for what. So we'll be sending that out. So that's kind of what we'd like you to do. That's not too much to do. You've got to probably talk to your folks back at the place we're going to be sending out. We will send out the PowerPoint as well as the recording. We'll send it on a link, Mia, is that correct? We can just put the link on an email?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll put the link on the email with the PowerPoint, with the renovation assessment tool. And I think there's another tool not a tool, but just I think we'll send that framework, the prevention framework document, just to kind of help people who haven't been around talking about prevention to kind of start thinking more about your program and how it fits in, because CalWORKS really is I think one of the largest child abuse prevention programs there is. When you think about the supports and services CalWORKS gives to families, it's an amazing program. So with that, we are going to get you out here 8 minutes early. How about that? Well, we really thank all of you. And while we couldn't see all of you, it was just too many, it wouldn't have worked. We will have some smaller. We're going to do some clusters, as we said, to find counties that are working on maybe some of the same strategies, so that we can pull together some what we call interest groups to help you get to know one another. And we will, we hope to have a convening in the fall. That's our goal, is to have a in-person convening this fall. So we will be in touch, and please stay in touch with me. I just love seeing everybody's name. It's so wonderful, even though I couldn't see your face. But see you soon.
Thank you.